Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to episode 63. Today, Holly and I are starting a new series all about friendship and leadership. We've talked before about building healthy relationships, and we've discussed marriage, but we haven't really tackled this issue of friendship yet. So along with the issue of friendship also comes the topic of loneliness. And loneliness is one of the biggest challenges that leaders face. But a lot of times I think we don't really know how to talk about it or who to talk about it with, because if we're lonely, then we feel like we don't have someone to talk to, right? The next 3 episodes are going to be interviews that Holly and I did with just amazing women. I'm so excited for you guys to hear these conversations over the next 3 weeks. But we figured today we would talk about this, just you and I, Holly, discussing this issue. And we're going to do it in a little bit of a different format than we usually do.
Yeah, so normally when we kind of do these episodes ourselves, we do it in a little bit of a, maybe kind of like a teaching style, where we're kind of bringing our ideas and our thoughts about things. And obviously there's a bit of discussion too, but today we really just wanted to have a discussion about it and not really do any sort of teaching, and kind of just talk about our own personal experiences with loneliness and friendship and leadership. So that's what we're going to do. So if we sound a little weird, or we or we're not quite sure of our answers, it's simply because we literally have a list of questions that we're going to go through, and we're just going to discuss it. So who knows what we might say.
It could be really interesting. Okay, so let's dive into some of these questions, Holly, so we can get into like this issue of loneliness and friendship.
Great. Okay. We're just going to dive into some of these questions, and I would love for you, as you're sort of listening, to kind of think back on your own experiences and what you have encountered as we discuss this, and maybe how it relates to you and where you're currently at. So, Esther, when have you felt the most lonely in leadership?
Okay, so I think that for me, the times that I have felt the most lonely have been when I have felt like there is nobody that I can talk to about a particular issue or topic.
Yeah.
And so most of the time that has been in relation to the church ministry, because there are certain things that happen that I can't talk to anyone about besides my husband, which, and I think my husband and I have gotten to a point where we really do enjoy having conversations with each other about these challenges, and we can definitely lean on each other. But there's just something different about having your girlfriend that you can call up and talk about whatever issues.
Right.
And if it is a confidential matter, or if it is a situation where there might be a change happening at the church, or like something that really just can't be discussed with other people, that I think is when I have felt the most alone.
Yeah.
So
I think for me, I felt most alone when I have had very differing ideas from people. I can think back to when I was working at the office I worked at. If my ideas differed from sort of the culture of the employees, and also differed from the ownership, it was kind of isolating and quite lonely, because a lot of times, I would agree with for example, the owners or the directors about a certain issue, and we would move forward, even if everybody in the office wasn't 100% on board. I felt like I had the backing of the directors and that sort of thing to kind of push these initiatives forward. But when I was sort of the lone person with a specific idea or a specific stance on something, it was very isolating. And it felt really difficult to sometimes even convey those ideas because it made me feel super vulnerable.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I was in a really great place where ideas were freely heard, even if they weren't taken,
Hmm.
100% in stock and moved forward with. They were always heard, and my ideas were always given respect to. But it can be very isolating when you're the only person speaking about something. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that somebody listening might relate to this. And what you just shared kind of took me back to my days when I did work in a more traditional job
Yeah.
as a social worker. And I remember in that office, I'm pretty sure I was the only Christian.
Yeah.
And I definitely struggled with loneliness in the sense of I was like the rest of the office had a particular view on like 90% of the
Mhm.
topics in society and life. And
Yeah. Yep.
and they often even would make fun of Christians or believers or people that
Yep.
had strong faith. And I would be sitting there thinking, okay, like, how do I deal with this?
Hmm.
And like, so that being the only person with a particular viewpoint or particular perspective can definitely feel isolating. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I can relate to that too.
Especially when you feel like you've worked with people for a while and you've built friendships
Mhm.
in those areas.
Yeah.
It even is more pronounced because you're used to having that camaraderie, and you're able to kind of like joke about things or whatever, and then all of a sudden you stand up for something different,
Yeah.
and like automatically you're at arm's length.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I think people sometimes just have a hard time swallowing the fact that their ideas are not 100% taken and ran with.
Yeah.
So there's that, or that they're not 100% agreed with. So, I mean, that's a little sticky, but
Mhm.
I definitely know where
Mm.
you're coming from.
Yeah.
When you were in those situations, did you feel like the loneliness kind of took you by surprise?
I think that, yes, going into ministry life wasn't necessarily, it kind of happened accidentally for
Mhm.
us. And, I guess when my husband and I were dating, I mean, he did go to Bible school. So, like, I knew there was an interest in ministry. And I had always grown up thinking that I would want to be a missionary. Like, so ministry in general was always, it wasn't like it took me by surprise. Like,
Mhm.
I would never
Yeah.
do something in this, but in the sense of the roles that we ended up in our church kind of happened gradually. So there wasn't a defining moment of like, oh, now, here you're working this whatever job, like, and you're not involved in things at all. And now all of a sudden you're a pastor or you're a leader. So it happened gradually. So I think that the point when I started to feel the loneliness, that did take me by surprise because up to that point, before he was kind of like officially a pastor, and I can't even remember exactly when this first happened to me, but I would say probably it's actually way back. And we talked about this in the episode where we talked with our husbands, but where I shared, that Scott and I went through a period of really some difficulties in our marriage. And I think that's when I felt the most lonely during that phase was when I felt like I'm having a problem in my marriage and I don't feel like I can talk to anyone about it because he's a pastor.
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
so I think at that point it was surprising and it was also very scary because
Mm,
I didn't know what was going to come. Like I didn't know how to proceed.
right.
What about you? Did you feel like it was surprising?
Yeah. So for me, when I think about the job that I was just talking about, I started out in that company as the receptionist and started out kind of as everyone's friend. It was my job to make everyone's life easier by making sure the office ran really smoothly and, just that things were working really well, and that I kind of grabbed any balls that were dropped and just sort of, went with it. So when I transitioned from that position to finance director, my role changed from making everyone's life easier to having to make some really, not, it wasn't only me, but having to be part of some really tough decisions. And so when you go from that, from one position to another like that, and you have friendships within that context, it really is eye-opening. And I wouldn't say that anyone necessarily made me feel bad or feel different, but I all of a sudden wasn't just kind of the person bringing up the rear and making sure that everyone was coming along. I was leading the charge. And so I needed people to follow me, and I needed people to buy into what I was saying. And just that swap of perspective really made me kind of realize that people were going to be listening to my ideas and listening to kind of how I was steering my department, steering my ship. And I needed to be thinking about more than just, is this running well? Like, I needed to have a bigger perspective. And so just that perspective switch made me really feel alone. And I didn't have a whole lot of like employee issues where I had to, come down really hard on people about things. Like, thankfully, I didn't have to do a whole lot of that. It was really more about the direction of the department and what we were doing. But it really made me realize that those type of friendships within a job, when you change positions like that, are not going to stay the same. It's not going to be the same old, and you have to figure out how to deal with a new reality and deal with the friendship in the new context that it's in.
Yeah. So let's kind of dig into that. How did you deal with it? How have you dealt with it when you felt lonely? And have there been people that you've been able to kind of turn to during these periods and to work through the loneliness?
Yeah, that's kind of that actually kind of goes hand in hand, because I would say that I didn't really know how to deal with it at first. And the other directors, the other leaders around me, the owners really, and it's not like I ever went to them and said, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling this way. It was just kind of a mentality of, okay, now you're sort of part of this director group. And it was kind of a decision that we were all in this together and kind of working for the same goal. And that inclusion really helped me, and sort of just watching how other people within that group handled conflict, handled interpersonal issues, handled different things. Like, watching other people do that really helped me figure out how to do it myself. And so then I felt less lonely, because I felt like I was part of that team. Like, I might have transitioned from team to team, and feeling as though I had someone else who was kind of going through the same thing as me, or felt that separation from the greater employees, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm saying it right.
I think this is one of those issues where there isn't like a clear-cut cookie cutter answer for these conversations. So
yeah, I would definitely say that watching other leaders lead and figuring out how they do it really helped me figure out how to do it. And in turn, it helped my loneliness. It helped me realize that I wasn't the only one going through it, and I wasn't the only one who had to deal with some of the stuff that we all dealt with.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What about you?
Okay. I think that I've dealt with it in positive ways and negative ways.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the things I've done the most is a lot of praying and journaling and talking to God about it, because like in those moments where I have felt like there isn't anyone else I can really talk to about this, that's been my only option, is to talk to God about it. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
No.
Like, I don't think I do believe we are made for community and we are made for relationships. But I also think there is something about turning to God as your first and foremost source of life and encouragement and joy and peace there's something about that. And I came to recognize, I think within the last couple years, that there have been times where I have tried to put too much on certain relationships, like
Mm,
too much weight and too much responsibility of that relationship for my own well-being.
yeah.
And so when some of those relationships maybe have changed or something has been difficult, it has forced me to recognize that God really can, only God should be my primary source, not this other person, whether it's my husband or a friend or whatever. So I guess my positive way of dealing with it would be turning to God first
Yeah.
and crying out to him. And like a lot of times I have found that the Psalms are super helpful because you see a lot of David crying out to God and being lonely. Like he had times where he felt completely abandoned, completely alone, all of that. But then I think maybe in an unhealthy way, I probably have driven my husband crazy with like just the complaining or the challenge, just like
Yeah.
maybe trying to talk through it too much with him,
Yeah.
um, which isn't always good for our marriage because he's like, all right, I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And then I may, and I'm trying to think, like, I'm not thinking of any particular examples, but I definitely think there's been times where I just kind of have thrown a pity party for myself and just been like, nobody else understands what I'm going through. Nobody else can understand what it's like to be an XYZ in an XYZ situation. Like,
Yeah.
and I have come to recognize that I believe that loneliness is one of the biggest tools that Satan will use to
Mhm.
destroy our ministry, destroy our lives, like if we let him. So thankfully I believe God has brought me out of those pity party moments
Yeah.
and helped me to recognize that no, actually you're not the only person that has experienced this.
Right.
Like,
Right.
no, you're not the only person that can understand what it's like to feel. Now, maybe that exact circumstance, obviously no one else has experienced my exact circumstance, but
Right.
there are other people who have experienced abandonment or experienced just deep loss or deep pain in a certain way.
Right.
And so to put myself into a position where I think I'm the only one that's experienced this, like that's actually a lie from the devil.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
And I think one of the things that you kind of touched on was our own expectations. So, our own expectations about either what the leadership role is going to look like, what we're going to be like in that role, what friends are going to be like as we're going through these sorts of things. I think a lot of loneliness and sort of isolation comes down to the fact that we had certain expectations for something and it didn't go exactly as we wanted. So
Yeah.
we don't feel supported or we don't feel seen or we don't feel validated. And
Yeah.
so we're going to talk a little bit more about expectation in a little bit, but I just wanted to point out, like, I think a lot of that, as you just pointed out, like, it's a lie from the devil. Like those sort of expectations of this is what your life is going to look like. This beautiful movie of everything, it's all going to be great. Those expectations are not really real. And when we put ourselves and sort of who we are and how we are and all of those different things into perspective, it kind of flips the script in our mind
Yeah.
about what the situation truly is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So what if we move to talking about friendship?
yeah. Okay.
Kind of brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what has friendship looked like for you, like
Mhm.
throughout leadership? You mentioned it a little bit in terms of how some of those things changed in a particular role, but just generally, what has your friendship kind of looked like over the years?
Yeah, so when I look back over the different stages of my life and I just think about friendship, not necessarily leadership, there was a time before we moved to the church that Esther and I went to together that I was sort of in my hometown and growing up, getting married, all of my friends were getting married and we were kind of, still sort of in that friend group. Things had changed a little bit, but as I was sort of venturing out through my life and trying to figure out what marriage looked like and what I looked like and who I was going to be and those sorts of things that you kind of deal with in your like later 20s, I think that friendship for me was a little bit of a rough spot because I was isolating myself. That's kind of when we were in the throes of infertility. And if you want to talk about loneliness, that's a great time to talk about loneliness.
Mm,
And, all of my friends were getting married and having babies. So friendship was really difficult for me
mm,
because I had these people that I had grown up with and that I loved, but were at very different points. And I wanted so much to be part of their joy and part of their next stage of life, and it was so difficult to be able to actually do that, and I don't think I had the maturity to be able to separate at the time. So friendship was really rocky for me at that time. And so when we moved to the different area where Esther and I went to church together, I didn't even really realize that I needed the type of friendship that I needed. I didn't know what I really needed from friendship, and I didn't know really how to live that out. And so, honestly, when we were at church together and those like 10 years of forming relationships and growing with people, those were probably the best 10 years of friendship that I've ever had in my life. And when I say that, I mean like as a group. I have had some very fantastic friendships throughout my lifetime, but they were sort of singular friendships. They
yeah.
weren't a group of friends. And so when I look back on that time, it was a really growing time for me. It was a really healing time for me. And honestly, I'm so thankful to God for that time because I feel like He was showing me this is what it can look like. And I've had this discussion with other people who have felt like they were feeling lonely and have had that experience. And we both just kind of rested in the fact that like God was showing us this is what friendship can look like. And now we need to go show other people that this is what friendship can look like. So I've had lots of different experiences with friendship, but honestly, I would say that the last 10 years when we were going to church together was probably the most healing and the most eye-opening learning and growing experience I probably could have had when it comes to friendship. And as I move into this next phase, it's difficult to be separated from that and to be away from something that was so great. But as I'm taking a closer and closer look at where God has put me, I'm seeing that, or I haven't seen it yet. I don't see that that type of friendship exists in great amounts. And so I really feel like now is my job to be that person for, whoever I'm put in with, whatever group of people I'm supposed to be doing life with, is to really cultivate that type of friendship. And it's been difficult for me because I feel like I need it, but it's more about what I can give to others and what I can show and help others get out of friendship, or what I can give to other people, how I can show them that God uses friendships to really heal and grow us. Does
Mm,
that make sense?
yeah. 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 And I think that actually kind of leads to another question I have for you. So I'm going to ask you
Okay.
that before I answer my own.
Okay, good.
So,
I want to hear yours.
because that kind of leads into this idea of expectations in friendship,
Yeah.
right? Because we have, like you said before, we have this picture in our mind of what it's going to be.
Mhm.
So, what would you say are your expectations in friendship?
Yeah, so this one's been a difficult one for me because I think I assumed when we moved that there would be someone that would just take my hand and lead me into this amazing group of friends that already existed, and it didn't happen. And so this first year that we've been here has been difficult. I've been extremely lonely, and I think it's been only compounded by the fact that that's what I expected,
Yeah.
because that's what my experience was at church for us together. And so honestly, I'm still kind of processing through what it is, but I've been listening to a couple podcasts and sort of reading different things. And I was really looking for friendship to meet my own needs. And while it does do that, that's not the point. And
Mm,
so I've had to kind of flip in my mind that the expectation of friendship is what I can give to people and how I can pour into their lives and how I can minister to them. And that actually really helps me because, and this sounds weird the way I'm going to say it, but I know how to do that. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean? Like I already know how to do that. And so when I feel called upon to do that, I know that I can do that. But when I felt like I'm looking for someone to fill me up and I'm looking for a really good friend because I need that companionship, for whatever reason, that made me feel super vulnerable and really tapped into my anxiety. And so I think honestly, the expectations of friendship and what we're going into it looking for have a huge impact on how those friendships are built and what they will look like. And honestly, I think if I had had any type of relationship in that first year based on those expectations, either it wouldn't have lasted or it wouldn't have been healthy.
Mm,
So I'm still processing, I'm
yeah.
still trying to figure this all out. But yeah, that's kind of been my most
Okay.
recent experience with expectation.
Yeah.
So, what has your friendship looked like throughout leadership or throughout life? I did mine more general, not
Yeah.
so much about leadership, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you guys are just getting the raw, real deal here today. So of
you
our
are.
conversation, because we don't really have I feel like this is one of the topics where I don't have any clear-cut answers. Like I said
Yeah.
before, like I don't feel like we could have done the teaching one on this because I'm like, well, I'm still figuring it out.
Yep. Yep, me too.
But for me, I've always I'm an introvert, so I've always had kind of a small number of close friends. I've never been that person who walks into a room and has like 20 people that I must go run and see. Now, obviously, in my role at the church, like I know a lot of people and I do love a lot of people and I connect with a lot of people. But in terms of friendship, I don't feel that I have a lot of friendships.
Yeah.
So I would say in high school, I had like this core group, 3 other girls that we were like, the 4 of us were besties. And I thought that we were always going to be best friends. Like that was my envisioning. And I was super devastated when I realized that wasn't going to happen. Even my senior year in high school, one of the friendships changed and one of the girls kind of pulled away. And so that was really hard. And then I went off to college and then I had another group of friends. Like I had a roommate that I became pretty close with that we roomed together sophomore year and senior year. And we were really good friends. And then I also had a few other gals that I had done like Bible studies with and things that I became close with. And I kind of have kept in touch with some of them over the years, but not close. And then I would say going into the adult years, I can see 3 distinct phases of friendship.
Mm.
And I think this has been one of the biggest things that I have had to learn about friendship is that it's not static.
Yep.
It doesn't stay the same. And in my idealistic expectations,
Yep.
it does.
Yeah.
And I think that issue of expectations is huge because once I have a group of friends that I'm close with, I do not want anything to change. I want us to keep hanging out forever and ever. I want us to keep having the same fun times and the connection and the vulnerability and the prayers and all of it. If you get that, you don't want to lose it. And I think that's
Absolutely.
kind of what you were saying, Holly, like you experienced something different during the phase that you were at our church. And it really is unique. I think not a lot of people have that.
Yeah.
And if you have it, then you don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is that I've realized through these different phases is that there always has to be 2 things. There always has to be intentionality about building those friendships and those relationships.
Yeah.
And there always has to be vulnerability.
Mm.
So if I could teach anything about friendship, that would be what I would teach. And I think in some of our conversations in the next few weeks, you will hear the women that we interview talk about those things and
Mhm.
share how a little bit more of the how to do those things. But I think that my first kind of group of friends happened out of a small group where we were a bunch of couples coming together on a weekly basis and meeting together and talking about the Bible and talking about, and this was kind of like most of us hadn't started families yet. And there was a mixture of some couples and some singles. And it was just like this awesome connection. But a lot of the women in that group I ended up being really close with.
Yeah.
In fact, a couple of them I still am close with today. And then when I started kind of a Bible study at our church, like that formed a new relationship group, I guess.
Yeah.
And some of the other people that I had been close with moved on in their lives, moved on to different places, different churches, whatever. And so that new phase started when we really started this small groups and like the women's retreat and some of those things where it brought some of us together. But that was intentional. Like there was some intentionality with how are we going to do this? And then there was the vulnerability of really actually talking about some hard things and being open to share some of the hard parts of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that going into other friendships, I have to keep that in mind, because if you experience hurt or if you experience difficulty in a relationship, it can make you feel like not doing that again.
Yeah. Oh,
I
absolutely.
think that's a really big risk for a lot of us. And especially if we are in leadership, there's a really weird line there.
Yeah. Yep.
And I even walked that line sometimes in small group where I was like, ooh, I don't know, like, how much do I share?
Mm.
And personally, I probably have erred on the side of sharing too much than sharing too little.
Yeah. Yep.
And maybe that's not always good, but I think that in small groups and even in any kind of friendship, someone has to go first
Mm.
with the vulnerability. And if the leader isn't doing that, then it's going to be hard for other people to do that.
Yeah. Agreed.
So I just gave you a really long, rambly answer, but
No, I think that's been my answers for everything you've asked me.
Yeah.
Really long and rambly.
but I'll just say, like, more recently, I think what I've realized is like you moved away. Some other things have changed in friendships. Some people have moved on to different things. Like I said, like it's happened again. Like this transitional time has happened again where some of the original friends that I've had have stayed, but some of that has changed. So it's been another adjustment period of like realizing that doesn't mean it's the end of the world.
Even though it feels like it at times.
It and it also doesn't mean that God doesn't have other relationships for me to
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part, is like I feel almost like I'm betraying someone if I start a new relationship or a new friendship. But that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
But like I have to trust, and just like you're in this phase of trusting that God is going to bring you the relationships and the friendships that you need.
Mm.
And sometimes there's a waiting period, I feel like. And
Yeah.
it's that period of almost like God is saying, am I enough for you?
Yeah. 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 And that's kind of been something that has been difficult for me. Like, what does it look like to be a friend with God? Like, what does that actually look like? Because when I think about it in terms of my human relationships, it doesn't compare. Like, in good ways and in awkward ways. I know that sounds interesting, but like in my mind, some people might be able to go out and have coffee and have a coffee date with God where you're just sitting there drinking your coffee. But for me, that hasn't been my experience. And I
Yeah.
don't know what that looks like. And I'm not saying that I don't have like personal time with Him, but when I think about it in terms of friendship, it's still a little bit baffling to me, and I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like. Like, he's still my Lord, he's still my Savior, he's still someone that I really love and that has had incredible impact on who I am as a person. But when I think of it in terms of friendship, it's confusing to me.
Mhm.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it
Yeah.
does because he's not a physical being that you're sitting
Yeah.
down at the coffee shop
Yeah,
with,
exactly.
and he's not usually talking back to you. I
Yeah.
mean, there might be times, that we do hear from God or we sense the Holy Spirit,
Mhm.
but it's not the same
Yeah.
as the conversation that you and I are having right now. So I
Yeah.
think I totally agree that that is a hard thing to figure out.
Mhm.
And I don't think that God is necessarily saying, hey, you shouldn't go out and pursue friendships.
Right.
you know,
Absolutely.
I'm the
Agreed.
only one that you should turn to. But it's that for me anyway, and I can only speak for my experience, but for me, I have recognized that there have been times where friendships or even my marriage have become my number one relationship that I
Yeah.
turn to.
Yep.
And that's where I think it becomes a problem.
That's the issue.
And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
Agreed. And I think honestly that was kind of this transition to moving and kind of feeling ripped away from my friend group has really made me realize that I really loved the fact that I got closer to God through those friendships and I got closer to other people through those friendships, but I was only seeing healing through those friendships. In other words, God's not only going to heal you through a relationship with other people. There are other ways that he wants to bestow healing upon you in your life and in your heart and in all of those different things. And so I needed to understand that he works in a myriad of ways and I can't only rely on that one venue of a really close friend saying, hey, this has been my experience with God and da 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 da. Like I can't only rely on that interpersonal friendship to be a growth point in my relationship with God. It
yeah,
has to be my own thing. And I definitely think, like, I know I have my own thing, my own relationship with him, but a lot of it was super dependent on those friendships. And
mm,
that's not a really great place to be when those friendships are ripped away from you
yeah,
because it feels like your relationship with God, or I felt like my relationship with God had to take on a whole new sort of appearance, how
yeah,
it was worked out, how I was experiencing him. And a relationship with another person that's talking about God is not the same thing as a relationship with God.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I think we should try and kind of wrap up this conversation with
Okay.
talking about, like, specifically about as leaders,
Yeah.
what are some of the challenges that leaders face when it comes to building friendships and building relationships? Because I feel like we could talk about this topic for like hours and
Yeah, I
there's
agree.
so much to it. But I think that for the sake of time, we can just kind of talk about what are some of the obstacles and then maybe what are some of the ways that we can prioritize it in our lives. So
Okay.
what would you say are some of the obstacles that you faced or that leaders in general face when it comes to building friendships?
So, me personally, what you talked about intentionality and vulnerability. And for me, I can be 100% there in the vulnerability aspect. Like, I bring it real every single time. I think it has to do with my personality to some extent. But I mean, I could meet someone at a coffee shop that I know and they're like, hey, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? Like, I could sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't whatever. I have a really hard time with the intentionality. And it's not because I don't love my people and it's not because I don't want that time. I chalk a lot of it up to anxiety, but I think that it's maybe just laziness. I'm not sure, but I have a really hard time with the intentionality side of it. And it's made it even more difficult now that I have this sort of all these miles in between me and my friends.
Mhm.
So I have to be even that much more intentional when it comes to those relationships. But I think from a leadership standpoint, it's even more compounded because I am willing to show my vulnerability through leadership, but I may not make those intentional friendships as a leader. In other words, I'm not necessarily looking for other leaders who are going to pour into my leadership and be a friend to me. I'm just looking to kind of, I don't know what I'm looking to do. I think I'm just letting whatever happen. And I think there has to be intentionality there, especially as a leader. So,
Yeah.
yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that we
Sorry.
talk about that in one of the episodes coming up. I don't know the number is going to be, but the one, I think we talk about that with Lori Wilhite. I feel like
Yeah.
she talked about like really seeking out the types of friendships that you need based on whatever role you have.
Exactly.
And so I would say that some of the obstacles for me have been time, like in different phases of my life that I have been either working a lot, like a couple years ago when I started my business, like my business kind of took over for a while. And I still have times where I feel like it takes over. And so I have to really, the obstacle is I feel like I don't have enough time to invest and be intentional in those friendships. So that's one. And I think a lot of people who either work in a high demanding job or in a ministry role that's very demanding, or as a business owner, like any of you in those types of situations probably can relate to that. Friendship sometimes feels like something that has to go to the bottom of the list because you have, if you're married, you have your marriage. If you have kids, you have your kids. Like those always have to come at the top. And then your job or your work or your business feels like it has to be up at the top too, you know? And then of course you need to be healthy and you need to exercise and you need to eat meals and do laundry and like have a clean house, you know? So it can feel like a lower priority on the list. And I think just like we've talked about in other conversations, there are phases where maybe something does have to give. And sometimes it might be friendships has to give for a little while, but I don't think it's healthy for a long term.
No, agreed.
So I think that's an obstacle. I think basically, so time or work commitments. And then I think, like you said, just like the risk of the intentionality, because you could be intentional. You could say, okay, I'm going to text my friends, once a week, these 3 friends once a week to touch base and to see how they're doing and whatever. And then I'm going to have a coffee date with somebody once a month. Like maybe you're going to be intentional, but maybe you text those 3 people and they don't text you back. Or maybe you reach out for a coffee date to 3 people and none of them can do it. And then you start to feel like, well, maybe I'm not friendship material, or maybe this friendship thing is for the birds.
Or maybe people don't like me. And I think they like me, but obviously they don't because they're not replying.
Right. Yeah. So then you tell yourself this story in your head, which may or may not actually be true. And we talked about this on a previous episode too. Like our perception is always seen through certain glasses based on our experience.
Right.
So I guess part of that is that even the intentionality takes vulnerability.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I think that's true.
So that's another obstacle. And, I had a friend of mine tell me, and I may have mentioned this before, but like when our friendship first started, she reached out to me and she felt like I wasn't ever the one reaching out. She felt like she was always the one reaching out. And I didn't even realize that. And like now we've been friends for years. And I was like, oh my word, I'm so glad that you didn't give up on me.
Yeah.
You didn't stop texting me or reaching out or calling or whatever, because I must have just been in a weird phase of busyness or whatever. Like I certainly didn't think that I wasn't being reciprocating. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is with all of this, with the ways that you need to prioritize friendship, is that there is always a level of risk involved and it can feel scary, but it's worth it. If you if you put in the work, I think it's worth it. And the beauty when you can get to a place where you have a good friendship with someone far outweighs the risks of somebody not replying to you or someone not wanting to go out to coffee or, whatever might happen in the process.
I think as leaders, we understand that leading something, someone, a group, a ministry, and a job, there's risk, right? And so we know when we go into leadership that there is risk. But I feel like at the same time, we also know what the reward is on the other end, or we know that there might be a reward, or, we have a certain goal a vision that we're trying to accomplish. But I think in friendship, we forget that there's risk, or we assume that, we make those expectations that the risk either isn't there or we mask it. I'm not really sure what it looks like, but
Mm,
we forget that the risk is worth taking.
yeah.
And we are nervous when there is risk, or we kind of become gun shy when there's risk. I know I do it,
Yeah.
but we're so used to doing it when we look at leadership and goals and visions and those sorts of things. But when we look at friendships, like, friendships are worth that risk, and they are worth the intentionality and the vulnerability, because when we get to those places where we've actually accomplished our vision and we've actually accomplished a goal that we set out, I don't know about you, but I want someone to share it with. I
Yeah.
don't want to be the lone person up there saying, I win, I did the thing.
Yeah.
I want to be up there, or at that vision saying, look at all the people I brought with me. Look at all the people that get to enjoy this with me. Look at all the people that their lives are benefited from this thing that we did together.
Yeah.
Generally, when I think about a vision of something grand that I want to do, it's not only about me, it's about what can my vision bring to other people's lives. And there's always risk involved in leadership and vision, and there's always risk involved in friendship and intentionality and bringing people alongside of you,
Yeah.
because people are messy and people can hurt you.
I literally was just thinking about this as this is messy. Like, friendship is messy. Okay.
Yeah.
We talk about it a lot. If you're married and you talk about marriage, like, marriage is messy, right? I mean, any relationship where there is any kind of intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
there's messiness, because
Yeah.
like you said, people are people, and we all have our hurts and we all bring that to the table.
Yeah.
And so I think a big part of this conversation is letting go of the expectations. And part of that too is letting go of the expectations, because what we see online, on social media, on blog posts, in inspirational videos is this beautiful picture of 5 girls walking down the street arm in arm as their tribe, and they're always together and they're always there for each other, and they never have arguments and they never have fights and they're always happy.
Mm-hmm.
And
And they're always perfectly dressed.
yes, they're also stylish, which has never been my case. So
That's not true.
so we put that image in our mind, and
Mhm.
then when we don't have that, we start to feel jealous,
Yeah.
angry, bitter, which makes it harder to have a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, so we have to also get rid of the picture of what we think friendship and relationship has to look like, especially in leadership. Because
Yeah.
for me, if I think about it for me, and we haven't even really like gotten into this part of it, but thinking about how your friendships look with the people that you're leading versus friendships with people you're not leading. So like,
Right.
part of it for me is thinking about, do I need to have friendships or a friendship with someone who is not part of my church or the group of people that I lead,
Mm-hmm.
and that also is in another leadership role in a different place that maybe we can relate with. And that's part of what, when we talk with Lori Wilhite and Brandy Wilson, they both run Leading and Loving It. And that's part of their vision for that ministry, is connecting women who are in those roles with each other.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I might need to find a relationship with someone outside of the circle of people I lead. And so that looks different than what it looks like on the pretty pictures of the Instagram posts,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I guess that's a lot of just talking about how messy this all is.
So this is our messy conversation about messy relationships
Yes.
and messy leadership
Yeah. Yeah, this is us saying we don't have this figured out, and stop convincing yourself that you are missing something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because that's a trap. I think that's a trap where we look at, and again, this is even like looking at the outside.
Yeah.
I posted a picture on my Facebook page this morning of me sitting down with 2 other gals from our church and doing an interview with them at an event we had. Someone might look at that and just be like, that's perfect. It's this image of friendship and relationship. And yes, there is a ton of beauty in there, but like, you also don't know all the things that happened to get to that point.
Oh my word.
know?
Yeah.
So it's so easy to convince ourselves that we're missing something, or that we're waiting for other people to reach out to us.
Yep. Yep.
So
That's where I've been the past year in both of those places. You hit the nail right on the head.
Oh,
Good job.
Holy Spirit's convicting us today.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, I've been there too. I've been in the place of like waiting for God to drop this perfect relationship in my lap,
Yeah.
at different phases again of my life, and expecting that person to just suddenly appear. That's going to be the perfect friend that I have in my mind.
Yeah, and that's the funny part. Like, whoever God's going to drop in, like, we already know they're perfect, right? They're our perfect friend. They're a perfect match for us. And there's never going to be any challenges. And, we're just going to click immediately, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's how life works. Okay, I hope you're hearing my sarcasm. Because God moves people into our lives, yes, for friendship, but also to challenge us and to teach us things about himself and about relationship and about life and about all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
I think he moves different types of people into our lives at different times because we need to learn different things from him.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
they are the vehicle that he is going to use for that. So,
and sometimes we are pouring into them and sometimes they are pouring into us.
mm-hmm.
And it's not always a 50-50 sort of
definitely
total equal friendship.
No.
So,
and if you're looking for a friendship to always be 50-50, that's also an expectation that needs to go out the window, because there are times when I've really needed friends to come alongside me for a sustained amount of time. And then there have been times when I've been able to pour into people for a sustained amount of time. And if I were to look at that friendship at that moment, it would be me doing all of the work.
Yeah.
And or that other person doing all of the work.
Yeah.
And really, in the end, again, it's not about what we can get from it, but it's about what we can give, and the ability to be able to see outside of yourself, and the ability to allow your friendships to be a ministry and not just self-serving.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's a good note to end on. So we are going to wrap up with this conversation about friendship. And I'm just like, I have no idea what the title of this episode is going to be. Something messy, probably.
I don't know, because we had a list of questions and we started on them, and then we've moved all over the place.
We took a different turn. So
we did.
But just make sure that you're subscribed, because if this topic of friendship and loneliness and leadership and ministry is something that affects you, then you're going to want to hear the next 3 episodes. Like, all 3 of the conversations are so powerful, and they are all sharing about some hard things.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage you to make sure you're listening to those episodes, because they're going to be they're also a lot more organized than this conversation was.
I think that every once in a while we don't follow the script, that we just be ourselves and have a good discussion.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's what we did today.
This is the kind of conversation that Holly and I would have over lunch.
Yes.
And just share our thoughts. And anyway, so let's do our ending question, Holly.
Okay.
If you were to perform in the circus, what would you do?
Okay. I have a complicated answer to this question. Okay. So, number 1, I don't want to do any animal acts. Like, that's just not me. We'll do the animal acts. I love my dog, and that's it. I can't do anything that is like hanging from wires or in the air. I can't do anything like that. I don't want to do any sort of acrobatic, jumping,
Okay.
gymnastic type things. Okay.
Right. Yep.
Because they scare me.
Okay.
So what am I left with? Right. I really want to be the dress changing lady. The lady that does like the fast changes and she like twirls around and like has all these pretty outfits. That is who I want to be.
Awesome. I would pay to see that.
It would be interesting. It would be really interesting. Yep.
And this is our question is like not something that you could actually do.
Right.
What
Right.
would you do if you were magically able to do it?
Magically
So.
be a part of the circus.
Yes.
And had all
Okay.
the abilities. Okay. What about you? What's yours?
I would be one of the trapeze artists.
Oh my word.
Swinging through the air, grabbing the bars and flying and doing loop-de-loops. So
Oh,
I don't know. I was always like, I don't really remember going to the circus a lot, and I've thankfully gotten out of taking my daughter.
yeah.
So,
I don't
but
like going to the circus
yeah,
either.
I don't know. I have mixed feelings, but
Yeah.
I definitely like that part of it. Like the acrobatic part seems really cool.
I once saw someone fall during one of those, and I hate to say that I have PTSD from it, but I think I have PTSD from it. I cannot watch that anymore.
Yeah.
It literally makes me so nervous because I witnessed that happen.
Yeah, that's really freaky. I wouldn't like that.
So that's why when we were talking about this before, I forbade you
Oh.
from being a trapeze artist.
Didn't obey your
I know you
forbidding.
I know you didn't. That's okay. I'll be hiding behind all of my dresses, like looking through, through them
Well,
at you, being nervous.
don't worry. I actually probably definitely will never do trapeze artists.
You can learn that if you want to. Like you can go, they have like experiences or whatever.
That's okay. I'll pass. I've
That's
gotten
not
a lot
fun.
less daring as I've gotten older. I'm becoming more of a wimp. So
I feel like you're an adventurer at heart. So
yeah, I am. But like I was much more so when I was younger.
Ah, okay.
And as I get older, I start to recognize all the bad things that could happen more easily. And
I was just gonna say how closer to death we are.
yeah, basically how much faster I could die if I did that and leave my daughter without a mother. So
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna wrap up.
Thank you for getting all the way to the end of this conversation.
Yes. And we want to know in our Facebook group, we will ask you if you were to perform in the circus, what act would you be doing? We'd want to know. So thanks everybody for tuning in this time.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast. And it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.